Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather outlook for today, Saturday, May 24th, 2025. Let's start off with the countdown till June 1st, the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. And as of today, we are now 8 days, just 8 days away from the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. And we're getting closer. We're now down to just over a week. Hurricane season is right upon us. Let's start off with the NOAA Coral Reef Watch sea surface temperature anomalies, updated roughly 2 days behind. The map for yesterday hasn't come out because this map is usually a day behind, but the map for yesterday hasn't come out, but shouldn't be much of a difference. Anyways, let's start off taking a look at what's going on in the Atlantic. We still have very warm sea surface temperature anomalies throughout most of the tropical Atlantic, especially in the Caribbean, and boy, especially in the Gulf of Mexico and even off the southeast coast too. And as I mentioned before, this is very significant because where do we always look at for development this time of year, or at least development in the early season in the Atlantic? It is always in the Caribbean, Gulf, and off the southeast coast. And those areas are all much above normal right now, and most of the tropical Atlantic too as well. A little bit of cold anomalies here in the eastern Atlantic, but once again, I wouldn't worry about this because it's May. We don't typically look at development out in the eastern Atlantic in May or June. Well, sometimes we don't, although it's been a little different the past several years, but I'm not sure we'll get that this year. But in general, we don't look at development in the eastern Atlantic early on in the season, so I wouldn't worry about this. And plus, the Atlantic has been warming up quite a bit in the last several weeks anyways, and also quite a bit of warmth here beginning to show up off the northwest coast of Africa, off the Iberian coast, right near the Canary Current, and sometimes some of these warm anomalies can seep down into the MDR, and we could get warming like that too. So we'll have to watch and see if the Atlantic gets any warmer, especially now that we're 8 days away from the hurricane season. It's right on our doorstep. And the other big puzzle piece as well is look at the Pacific on the other hand. We have an overall pretty warm Atlantic, except for the subtropics, which is actually a positive that the subtropics isn't really that warm, except off the southeast coast, it's really warm. But the subtropics overall is not that warm over a generally warm deep tropics. It's actually a positive sign for the Atlantic in terms of whether or not we'll get an active season, versus the Pacific, still very, very cold. We still have no El Nino on the horizon. And also, as I mentioned before, these very cold anomalies off the southwest coast of the United States and off the Baja Peninsula, that too has a big suppressing factor on the Pacific as well. So cold Pacific versus a warm Atlantic, you put those two together, you would assume it'll probably mean an active hurricane season. Hence why we had the predictions come out this past week from NOAA and also others, which I reviewed, indicate an active season. So it's all coming together. And once you kind of put all the puzzle pieces together, it all makes sense. Looking at the NOAA 3.4, or not NOAA, the Nino 3.4, well, this map is a map from Coral Reef Watch, which is made by NOAA, or at least put out by NOAA, but whatever. Looking at the Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies, it's dropping off. We are having a trade wind surge in the eastern Pacific right now, so we're seeing the sea surface temperature anomalies drop off. The latest value is negative 0.1. So we're in cool neutral territory, and this will probably fluctuate between warm neutral and cool neutral throughout the next several months. But in terms of us once again going towards El Nino or maybe even a La Nina, we're probably not headed in either direction. So neutral, it seems to be the way we're going for this season, and that's where we are right now. And taking a look at the SOI, kind of slipped into the positive territory over the last week or so, but is also going back up now slowly. As I mentioned, we have a strong trade wind surge ongoing in the Pacific right now, and that'll actually be the case over, I think, at least the next week. And you could actually see that too with the daily contribution, at least for today, positive 23 points. So that's definitely going to add quite a bit to the SOI average, and we'll probably see this skyrocket back into positive territory very soon. Bottom line, and I think we can pretty much confirm it now for the season, now that we're only 8 days away, we will not have an El Nino. Let's look at sea surface temperatures, actual sea surface temperatures, not just the anomalies. Let's start off in the Gulf of Mexico. The entire Gulf now is pretty much at or above 26 degrees Celsius, because this graph is a little bit off, but this is the 26 degrees shading. It's this kind of sky blue, and we have that pretty much throughout the entirety of the Gulf of Mexico, and we even have 27s for the most part, and even some 28s beginning to fill in. We have the loop current in here, and we have 28 degrees Celsius stretching in from the Caribbean all the way, already making it northward pretty decently into the Gulf, and also some of this shelf water off the western coast of Florida here already warming up to 28, 29, and even a little bit of 30s beginning to pop off here in near the Keys and off the southwest coast of Florida, I guess near the Everglades. So they're already seeing very warm sea surface temperature anomalies, and also in the Bay of Campeche too. The bottom line is the Gulf is already warm enough for development, because we're already at the 26 degrees Celsius mark, which encompasses now the entire Gulf. And especially as we are very close to June, we're very close to the start of the season. This is very significant, because that means conditions are favorable in an area that, once again, we typically look at this time of year for development, and that is in the Gulf of Mexico, and it is very warm. What about off the southeast coast? That is also getting warm too. It's warming up slowly along the loop current here off the southeast coast. Seems like we are at 26, even some 27s, and I guess this red shading in here is up to 28 degrees Celsius. And even off right along the southeast coast, we're also beginning to warm up too. Right near Georgia and the South Carolina coast, we are already reaching 26 degrees Celsius. I think that's actually 25, but there's actually some 26s in here too. The southeast coast takes a little bit longer to warm up, but we're also getting there. But if something does, and it does happen sometimes, if something does try to get its act together along the Gulf Stream, it'll definitely probably have more than enough warm enough sea surface temperatures to support it. So that is beginning to warm up pretty decently as well. And let's look at tropical cyclone heat potential. So pretty much ocean heat content. So that's the energy that is stored in the ocean below the surface. Kind of like subsurface sea surface temperature anomalies like we look at in the Pacific, but not actually sea surface temperatures, rather than the energy that is stored in the ocean below the surface, or so pretty much like the energy supply that is available for tropical cyclones to develop. And we have a lot of it, especially in the Caribbean, although that is typical because the Caribbean is always pretty much going to be warm enough for development in the Atlantic. So the Caribbean will always have the most amount of ocean heat content ready for tropical cyclone development. But also in the Gulf too, where we pretty much now have the entirety of the Gulf with at least some extent of ocean heat content available. And you could obviously see here where the Gulf Stream kind of pokes out. We have very heightened values from the Caribbean extending into the Gulf Stream. And this will be very significant to watch, to see, because sometimes the Gulf Stream kind of breaks off some of these loop eddies, which can then migrate northward and then westward over time in the Gulf. And in the past, you probably know about this, especially if you studied Hurricane Katrina, or if you watched Hurricane Katrina, and I even think Hurricane Harvey. Sometimes sometimes storms can cross over the loop current and these loop eddies that break off and help storms really explode in intensification. So we'll have to watch that throughout the season to see if that might ever potentially happen. And then also here along the southeast coast, we're beginning to see some ocean heat content build. And as the weeks go by, we're only going to see more ocean heat content build. And probably by the time we get to July and August, we'll have more than enough ocean heat content for significant development off the southeast coast. And eventually, too, the MDR will begin to fill in. For right now, we only have, I think, in the westernmost. Is this broken up into fourths? Yes, it is. So the westernmost fourth right now is where we have the most amount of ocean heat constant in the MDR. Watch as this will probably fill in through the rest of the MDR over the next several weeks once we start getting into July and especially August, which is when we start actually watching the Eastern Atlantic for development, though. But for now, we're focusing on the Western Atlantic, at least within the first few weeks of the season, and throughout the Caribbean, definitely lots of ocean heat content available, and definitely more ocean heat content available pretty much throughout the entire Gulf as well. So positive signs for development there. Let's talk about, though, something that might be happening in the short term. So enough of, talk of things that we need to watch for over the next several weeks. What about something that's happening right now, and that is in the Eastern Pacific? We have our first high chance. I posted on Twitter yesterday our first apple of the year representing red, because apples, for the most part, are red. Bottom line, we have a high chance of development in the Eastern Pacific as something might get going next week here in the Eastern Pacific. We might have our first depression or named storm. And if we do get a named storm, the first name on the list in the Eastern Pacific will be Alvin. An area of low pressure is expected to form early next week, several hundred miles off the south of the southern coast of Mexico. Conditions appear favorable for development, and a tropical depression is likely to form. So you know that the National Hurricane Center is confident in something happening around the middle of next week, moving west to west-northwestward over the next at 10 to 15 miles per hour over the next several days. Luckily, anything that does develop will probably stay off the coast of Mexico, so no direct threats to Mexico you should worry about if you are in Mexico, or if you live in Mexico, or if you are in Mexico for vacation. Maybe it's like an early summer vacation, which I know some people might be doing. You don't have to worry about any potential direct impacts from whatever does indeed develop, but always remember, and this is certainly an impact too, not direct, but this is definitely an impact, and it definitely does take people's lives. Whatever storm does develop will produce rip currents, and that'll probably create rough seas along the shores. And if you're not careful, it can take your life. And because of the fact that it's caused by a storm, I would consider it an impact that people need to be mindful of. So keep that in mind over the next several days in the Pacific. And then meanwhile, in the Atlantic, nothing happening, at least over the next week. But we'll have to see beyond that as we get into early June if things might start to light up in the Atlantic, as we once again begin the Atlantic hurricane season in just 1 week. Can you believe it? So really quickly, let's look at the GFS model, and then we'll look at severe weather, and then we'll finish off here. Let's look at the GFS model in the Eastern Pacific, and then you could see, let's take it out over the next 24 to 48 hours. You could see on the 850 millibar vorticity, as I always say, you're looking at the vorticity, you're looking for something to bundle and consolidate over one low pressure area, and that's how you know the model is hinting at something potentially developing. And there you have it here, south of Mexico in the Eastern Pacific at hour 66. You could see bundling of vorticity beginning to occur, and then this is by the 72-hour mark. We have pretty much a developing tropical system, and then this is by hour 90 and hour 96. That looks like a bona fide tropical storm. Let's actually see the intensity on this. 980 millibars, so that's actually a hurricane by then, so a bona fide tropical system. And then let's take it out into hour 120, and then up into the next 6 to 7 days. Might get actually a little bit close to the Mexican coastline, but I'm just going to really quickly kind of take this beyond the 7-day time frame, kind of cheating a little bit because you're not really supposed to do this, but the GFS does curiously kind of have this fizzle out, so it might actually get a little bit close to Mexico. But as far as at least over the next several days is concerned, no direct impacts once again. But bottom line, we have development. Obviously, the National Hurricane Center is very confident, and looking at the GFS, the models are very confident in something developing too. And, just for consistency, just to see if there's any agreement with all the models, Let's look at the European. The latest run from the European is the 0Z. Looking at the vorticity, the European also developed something too, so it's not the GFS alone that is showing something, although the Euro is a little bit later. I don't really care about the timing right now. All I care is about the models actually showing something, and yes, the European does show something, although they form it roughly right around 5 days, while the GFS, on the other hand, let's see, when do they have this developing? Roughly through already pretty much developed, and I would imagine this is already probably a tropical depression or a weak or a low-end tropical storm, probably 72 hours out, while the Euro barely shows anything. It's okay. Sometimes the models don't necessarily agree on timing, but eventually the Euro does show this area develop. The Euro does show something, so at least both models show something. And this is not just something random that the GFS is showing. So the National Hurricane Center, I would say, is justified in having a high chance for development. So we'll be watching that as well over the next several days. Before I end, I want to go over severe weather because we do have some of that today, and why not go over severe weather since we are in severe weather season. We have a slight risk of severe weather today across portions of the south, extending all the way from Alabama into the south central United States, some portions of Oklahoma and Texas in the slight risk as well, and then we have a marginal risk extending all the way from Wyoming down into the south, and then there's also a patch of elevated severe weather over southern Florida expected today. And then let's take a look at the tornado risk. 5% chance over Texas and Oklahoma, but nothing major in terms of tornadoes, wind, and looks like hail is going to be the biggest risk, and that once again will be over Texas and Oklahoma. Day 2, let's take a look at the risk then. Pretty much over the same areas, Texas, Oklahoma, and the South, with a tornado risk only at 2%, so not really any significant tornado risk for tomorrow. Wind is at 15%, and the largest threat, once again, looks like it'll be hail. And then once again into day 3, Texas is going to have to deal with quite a bit of severe weather over the next several days. Another slight risk for Texas, and then let's take a look at the day 4, the 8 time frame, nothing significant. So at least we're not seeing any major severe weather outbreaks on the horizon. Thank God, as we don't need it right now, especially after the last several weeks with pretty intense severe weather outbreaks and pretty damaging and deadly tornadoes. So that's good. So at least we have time for breather and for people to be able to recover and recuperate. But also make sure you're planning ahead as well for hurricane season, as once again, that begins next week. And also, I didn't make a graphic for this, but just a little bit of notice for you. Next Sunday night, that's when June 1st will be. That's the first day of the hurricane season. Sunday, June 1st, next week, I will be doing a live stream at 7 o'clock to kick off the first day of the hurricane season. I do it every single year. I should have made a graphic for this to kind of notify you, but I will probably make a graphic sometime this week and upload it on Twitter and probably upload it on the community tab on YouTube as well, so you have the notification for it. So if you want to stay tuned for it, I would really recommend you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell as well if you haven't already. And also turn on the notification bell and subscribe for any of my other videos that I do, which we'll be doing a lot of very soon as we get into the hurricane season. Thanks for watching, though. Going to end it off for today. Hope you enjoyed what you saw today. Like, comment, subscribe, as I always say. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll be back for you next week.